So the Sun has, in their own words, blown the lid on a nationwide racket. This is illegal delivery drivers, asylum seekers, suspected of earning money from these delivery companies and claiming taxpayer handouts at the same time. This is the Sun's words. And yesterday they had phones and bikes seized when police launched a crackdown. So bosses from Deliveroo, Just Eat and Uber Eats last night hauled into the Home Office for a dressing down and have now pledged to flush out their illegal workers with stricter vetting, and the Home Office saying the government will ramp up Home Office enforcement raids.
I mean, their obligation is surely to know, if you employ somebody, you have to know their immigration status, to have seen their passport, to understand, their legal standing. I mean, it's not clear why it doesn't apply.
And I think the Sun is asking why they had to do this,
well, that's the point,
rather than the government.
Fantastic journalism by the Sun, because they broke this, I think, a week ago, and they've kept on
week.
it. Yeah, they've kept on it and kept on it. And Ed, you're right. The bosses of these companies, there should be criminal prosecutions because their job is to know where their employees are coming from. They don't know anything about these people. They've obviously got no proper... they've got no right to be here. Apart from the fact they're abusing...
Well, they're asylum seekers, so we don't know if they have...
but we don't know where they're from.
Yep.
We don't know if potentially they're dangerous. This is
a big jump.
And
well,
they're
it's
not...
a scam. It's a great
they're
scam.
not... The thing about asylum seekers, Kevin, is asylum seekers are entitled to somewhere to live, support for living, and also an allowance, a cash
And you know what the allowance is?
Yeah, it's £49.18.
Yeah, if you don't... to cover your meals, clothes, toiletries. If you're in somewhere where meals are provided, you get less than a tenner.
Yeah, you might not think it's just, but it is the law.
No,
and that is the legal support, and you are not then allowed to work.
But I'm putting it in...
And of course, the point is that people are concerned about is if people are then allowed to work, it becomes more of a draw, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's a draw anyway, because we have a deregulated labour market. And these companies don't treat them as employees, don't look for national insurance
numbers. But this isn't deregulation. This is illegal working.
It is, but I'm looking at the illegal...
There is regulation, and it looks like these regulations are being breached.
The Sun are looking at the illegal workers, I'm looking at the illegal employers who are exploiting them, the companies. Now, when people came seeking asylum, while their claim is being heard, we decide whether they can stay or go. If you allowed them to work, this wouldn't happen, and we would then save a small fortune.
But
they could pay for their own
Conservative and Labour have not
their own meals, their own accommodation. They could pay tax, and we've got a system where you trap people with basically no money while they're in limbo for a long time.
The problem is, Kevin, I mean, the signal you sent by saying big backlogs on our asylum processing, but by the way, if you come to Britain in the meantime, you can work legally. I mean...
You wouldn't need small boats, you'd need ocean-going liners. They'd be full of people saying, I can go there, even though I may not even be entitled to be there.
The signal sent now is there's a deregulated labour market here, and you can come across...
And you know there's not public support for what you're advocating.
No, but you've got to make the case. I think people are quite rightly saying we're spending far too much on hotels and accommodation. I'm with them. Labour's inherited a broken system from your lot, which used to just shout Rwanda instead of dealing with the problem. The government's got to deal with it. And as you deal with it, if you allowed people to work in these jobs and you allow them to work legally, they can pay their way, they can pay their tax, and you wouldn't have a legal work.
There'll be even more coming, even more. It'll be like a magnet.
The Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, said to The Sun, this practice creates a pull factor to the UK for illegal immigrants in Europe. Deliveroo, Just Eat and Uber Eats should be ashamed of themselves and should feel the full force of the law for what they've done. And we should say that the firms themselves, so the Home Secretary apparently has had a word, the firms say they're going to bolster facial verification checks within 90 days. Just Eat said it would conduct checks daily instead of monthly, and fully supports government efforts to tackle illegal working. Deliveroo says it takes a zero-tolerance approach to anyone abusing our platform. And Uber Eats said it is committed to tackling illegal working and welcomes continued collaboration.
Not worth the paper it's written on.
With the industry.
And what do you think is happening? Do you think it's that people are using a false identity, or are they getting somebody who is a citizen to be on the platform, and then essentially they illegally subcontract it to other people to do the work?
Or are the companies just not caring?
They don't care.
They've got a steady supply of cheap labour and they couldn't care less. Because they've been, presumably, been getting away with this for years.
Yeah,
because we've seen the explosion in numbers of these wretched delivery bikes since the pandemic. So it's probably been going on for years.
They just want workers with no rights. What's better to have a worker with no right who can't complain about the rates they're asked to do,
Kevin, but
than
the allegation,
somebody who is working unlawfully?
But the allegation you're making is that the companies know these people are
they
working
just don't
illegally.
Care.
Or turn a blind eye.
Yeah, the speculators who put money in, the private and equity companies sitting in their gleaming offices in Mayfair, hoping to make a big buck, don't really care. And then it'll just cascade down. They're not like the big companies that have reputations and want to protect them and do go the extra mile. Right. They'll be fined. You can be fined for each worker they have employed there, and they should fine them to the max under the law.
But what about the people who are breaking the law? What's going to happen to them? Are they going to now stay in their hotel and not leave? Are they going to be kept under lock and key? Are they going to be prosecuted? Are they going to be deported, pray tell? That might help.
I'm not entirely sure what the answer to that is, because we haven't spoken to the police directly. But according to The Sun, one rider who had his mobile phone taken by an officer denied working for a food firm before the phone rang. And the officer asked him, "Why are Deliveroo calling you now, if you don't work for them?"
You're late with your McDonald's delivery.
Pizza, please?
I hope it wasn't the local Nick.
You had a complaint from Mrs. Smith in Downsby Road.
Where is it?
But officers did arrest those illegal migrant delivery riders in a number of cases. Did somebody say just nicked? Is the headline on The Sun this morning. Right.
Good Sun journalism.
It is. It is.
Well, yes, and acknowledged by the government, it seems, because the Home Secretary is taking action. Shall we move on to something that's not going terribly well for Keir Starmer, although it's slightly better than it was a week ago.
On that.
So that finally, the welfare reforms that we have been discussing at length, the vote is today. Has the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Work and Pensions Secretary, have they won over enough MPs that they can get this bill through? And how nervous will they be about this assessment that it's still going to throw 150,000 people into poverty? A Labour government that presumably wants to bring as many people out of poverty as it possibly can.
Yeah, and saying it's only 150,000 now. It was going to be 250,000. We've reduced it. I think we'll win the vote, but it's not the end of this battle, and nor should it be.
I'm not sure it's even better than last week, I mean, before you've done your U-turn, you've got a chance to grip the situation. The worst thing in political leadership is to grip the situation and find out it's actually not that great.
But also,
Debbie Abrahams, the chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, she's hauled into Downing Street. There's a long discussion. They think is persuaded. She sees the detail and says, actually, I was voting against last week, and I think I might vote against today, or at least abstain.
But also, the government, as part of the climb down, announced a review into these benefits by Sir Stephen Timms, who is a long and experienced welfare minister. The review won't be published until after these benefits are going to be taken off of people. What's the point? Well, it's completely pointless.
They put the cart before the horse. You have the review. You consult all the disabled groups. You work out what you want to do. Now, if it's to get Britain working, that's fantastic. Right? Get people into work who can, who want to. All those schemes, fantastic. I mean, a lot of disabled people work. Anyway, a lot of people who, or sizable, I think it's about a sixth of people who get personal independence payments work also. But to say, right, we're just going to postpone it, kick it down the road, say 18 months, some people who have the same condition as you won't get money in future, but we're going to have a review at the same time. It's kind of crazy. It's firefighting in a panic.
But you know exactly why they've done this. If they had said
they got it wrong.
But in terms of this point about the timing of the review, if they had said, we'll have the review, and on the basis of the review, then we will make final decisions on the reforms, none of the savings, which they need to include in their budget numbers, would be allowed. Whereas if they say, we're going to do it anyway, but we're going to have this review, in the short term, because fundamentally this was about savings this year and next year.
Yeah, and if this government, I said before, it's got no narrative, doesn't know what it's trying to achieve. If they try to make the case for these cuts, that we are going to cut these benefits because we want to... There's an honourable case trying to get people on benefits who have not worked for a long time back into work. They could have made an honourable case, but this was just about saving money.
The government ministers do continually say it's in the title of the government, Labour government. We want people to labour and be employed for their labour.
But this is about saving money, and because the people they are targeting on PIPs, most of them are already working anyway.
No,
a lot of them
are. But it's whether you want to take away money from people who can't wash themselves properly and have quite serious medical conditions. Now, there's an issue, I accept, around the growth in particularly young people saying they aren't resilient mental health issues. There is, but you can assess those people, and if they're gaming the system, you can deal with them. But this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt people that a Labour government was not elected to hurt. It was elected to help, not hurt.
The Secretary of State said again, 1,000 people a day are signing up for PIPs.
Yes.
That's a small town every year.
They keep saying that. I did say to the government minister, is that a briefing note you've been given? 1,000 a day, the size of Leicester.
Leicester, that's the briefing note, because we've all heard that.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, the Welfare Secretary said earlier this year that people are, quote, taking the mick, i.e. they're screwing the system, gaming the system. So are they not doing that anymore? Are we not worried about that anymore if we're watering down the reform?
You would get right. The numbers have gone up, but you would get people making new claims because they become ill, they become disabled, it's a benefit PIP. You've got to be of working age. Doesn't mean you have to work, but you've got to be of working age. So, of course, some people become pensioners, so they'll come off it. Other people will come into the workforce because they'll become, I don't know if they do it 16 or 18, whatever that is. You'd get a churn anyway. I think this 1,000 a day figure is kind of not very helpful. If you look at the numbers,
so personal independence payments, these are payments independent of whether you're working, to help people to deal with their disability in the home or immobility.
Living allowance.
The number of claimants is projected to go from 2.7 million now to 4.2 million. So it's going to go up by 1.5 million in the next 5 years.
It's astonishing.
How either there was loads and loads of people who were disabled who weren't getting the money before, or there was some huge rise in disability happening, which
presumably COVID.
But how do they know that there's going to be another 300,000 next year and the year after? How do they know that? Do they have a crystal ball?
Is the idea that the system has become too generous and too many conditions are now that people could
Taxpayers
live
Alliance
with?
said yesterday one of the people getting paid for is acne, severe acne. I had terrible acne when I was a kid.
Oh, no.
I had terrible acne when I was first at work as a young reporter. Nobody gave me a benefit.
You'd have to look like the Elephant Man to qualify on that. A few spots won't get you, mate. It's where we run up on the propaganda from the government and right-wing groups like the Taxpayers Alliance, which would like to just about get rid of most of the welfare state and reality of people's lives.
Yeah.
And then when you get the reality of people's lives and you see a face and a name and you have the story, that's where the government loses the fight.
The problem is, Kevin, that doesn't quite fit with the facts. If you take the last 10 years, right, there's not something which has happened in Britain which is so different from other countries. We all had a pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah.
We all are living in, the 21st century. But in Britain, unusually, you've had this much, much steeper rise in claiming these disability benefits. Jeremy Hunt said, because we had him on last week, we asked him about this, he talked about it in his book. He said that he made a change in the law, the Care Act, back in 2014 when he was Health Secretary, to say that the Health Department had to treat people with non-physical illnesses, with mental illnesses, in the same way, the same degree of seriousness and esteem. He said one of the unintended consequences of that change, which is a good change, is that translated over into
benefits,
the welfare system. And so what's happened is that people are applying and then getting support to be out of work, which
for a mental health condition,
exactly,
or a mental health impact of a condition,
when in
Because
fact
it's
they'd be better off
treated- yeah.
working, was Jeremy Hunt's argument. So,
Yes.
But the point is
would.
that something has happened in Britain in the last 10 years, which is different from other countries, and unless we understand it, it's going to cost us tens of billions
And isn't
more.
it because the benefit system is too generous?
No,
It must be.
It's not to do with, I'm not sure it's to do with generosity. I think it's to do with the way in which the health service started treating people medically, and then it then got translated over into financial support, and you get into a system where people think, well, if this is how I'm feeling, and I go and see the GP, and suddenly you're on PIP.
But this is costing the taxpayer billions and billions, and it is unsustainable.
It's going up even with these reforms.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, you're aggregating, but the individual payments are between 30 and just over 180 quid a week. So, you know, some people will only be on 30 quid. Now, you might, they'll all add up, but it's not a generous system. That is just not the case. To get the 180, you're probably a wheelchair user with lots of complex needs.
It isn't about the generosity of the individual payment. It's about whether the system's become too generous about the conditions that it covers.
Which I appreciate. You can have a discussion around.
Maybe that's what Stephen Timms will do. About, how many conditions are covered.
But do that before you do the cuts, though.
That is the problem. The moment you do a reform, which is about making things better, about supporting work, about long-term reform, but you say, but there is an immediate imperative to make savings now, that's when you get into difficulty, always with these reforms.
And that's what enraged Labour MPs yesterday. That's why some of them would not start a vote for it.
That's where they started with the winter fuel allowance.
Yes.
I just say, right, we need to save some money quick. There's a £1.5 billion.
Which leads me to the question, if the Chancellor keeps saying things, I mean, we talked about the U-turns that Keir Starmer is saddled with now and whether his credibility and authority has been mortally damaged. But if the Chancellor is announcing that she's saving money for the taxpayer by cutting winter fuel allowance, and then that's just overruled, and cutting benefits, and that's overruled. Andrew, is she on resignation watch?
He doesn't want to, in my view, I read about this on Saturday, he doesn't want to lose her because she's a very useful lightning conductor for him, the Prime Minister.
She's like a shield.
She is. She's absorbing it. On the doorstep, people moan about that woman, that Chancellor. She's getting along with abuse. So she was there until the budget, and if she has to raise taxes, which is a breach, or if she has to change her own rules about how she balances the books, then I think she's finished.
And if you add up these U-turns, I mean, these U-turns are now, compared to a month ago, she's got to find an extra £4.5 billion every year simply to pay for the Prime Minister's announcements of the U-turn.
One of the things apparently she might do is slash the ISA tax allowance. Now, The cash exactly, the cash ISA, which is currently £20,000 that people can save without paying tax on those savings. And there is a suggestion, according to the Telegraph, that might be reduced to £4,000.
She wants people to be saving it in an ISA, which is stocks and shares, because she thinks that's better for the economy and to encourage people to make this switch. But
that's not a culturally, I would have thought, widespread and supported idea. I mean, people save their money.
She's not going to get £4.5 billion a year out of that.
No,
she's not. And also, you could argue again that's a tax increase.
Yeah.
It will be argued by the opposition as a tax increase.
It will be, indeed. I just want to draw your attention to the Norwegian lottery. Not sure if either of you have ever...
I don't do the British one.
But be careful, because talk about U-turns. Norwegian lottery bosses have sent a text message apologising to tens of thousands of disappointed players who were accidentally told they'd won large sums of money.
Can you imagine? Yes.
I know. What if you've already spent it?
Oh, my goodness. Right. Ole Fredrik Sveen, who's my age, received a notification informing him he had won the equivalent of £86,000 while he was on holiday.
For a lot of people.
They had to get in touch with him.
I bet he had a good weekend.
To say, I'm very sorry, it was £9. They'd made a mistake in translating, converting from euros to the Norwegian kroner. Someone had pressed the wrong button
there will be a resignation over this.
Conversion machine.
Or a dismissal.
Several thousand people. Doesn't that constitute a contract?
Well,
if you say to several thousand people, you've won tens of thousands of pounds, and it's the Norwegian lottery.
Yeah. And you've gone for a slap-up meal at a hotel.
Well, and the rest.
Exactly.
£9, that's not going to pay your tax.
But even if you hadn't spent it, the emotional impact on you. You think you get this windfall, you're really happy, you're making plans, then all of a sudden it's just cruelly taken away.
Perhaps
like a
paid off a debt, paid off a mortgage, paid for your care home. I mean, you can imagine all the things that emotionally committed
we've all done it. What would I do if I won the lottery?
Yes,
well, now I can.
I think the Norwegian courts are going to have
are going to be full for the next few years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.